There are nights when a man's honor isn't broken in secrecy, but snapped right in the middle of his own living room, under the warm yellow light Sabrina turned on to make the footage pretty, in front of relatives, partners, neighbors, and a whole slideshow claiming I had lost clarity, needed guardianship. The peak was the moment my son, the boy who once learned to walk in this cedarwood house, stood before the crowd and said, "Dad is a danger to my future. This house, I have to keep it. If you have ever been turned into a pretext for someone's ambition by your own family, ever been smeared inside the very home you spent your whole life protecting, leave a single. So I know you're still here with me. Tell me what city you're listening from. If you believe that silence at the right moment can turn a room full of people laughing at you into a place where others have to bow their heads, hit follow and turn on the bell. I know when you are here with me. My name is Gideon Hale, 73 years old, and this craftsman's cedar house is the one thing in this world I dare say I understand better than my own heart. The house was built in 1910, when Portland wasn't yet packed with coffee shops and bicycles the way it is now. Every gray, rainy morning falling over the city, the old cedar smell rising from the ceiling mixes with the scent of coffee and the sound of the streetcar running past the block. The beams above have watched me grow up, then marry Evelyn, then hold Mason in my arms, and now watch that very sun look at me like an obstacle. That morning, Portland drizzled from dawn, the road out front soaked, rain streaks sliding down the window frame stained by a century. I stood in the old tiled kitchen, the gas stove that had been with us for over 20 years, soft scrambled eggs in the pan, the dish Evelyn had eaten since her second stroke. The doctor said she struggled to swallow and could only eat soft foods. I listened, adjusted the recipe again and again until I found the right texture so she wouldn't choke. I whisked the eggs with a bit of milk, a little butter, and very low heat. The smell of eggs and butter rose, blending into the scent of wood and rain. To me, it was the smell of an ordinary day. I heard the wheels rolling on the wooden hallway behind me, the wheelchair Evelyn had used since her recent fall. I turned and saw her there, face thinner, but eyes still carrying traces of that old playfulness. "Can you take me to the garden later?" Evelyn forced the words out, each sound pushed past a mouth now slightly crooked. "I want to see the maple." I smiled, nodded. "It's only light rain. I'll wheel you out to the porch and we can look through the glass." I plated the eggs, added some toast, and carefully cut them into small pieces. I set them on the tray, getting ready to bring it into the small room on the first floor, the room that used to be my study. Now Evelyn's room, because she could no longer climb the stairs. I had just turned when I heard light shuffling. Then the smell of expensive perfume flooded the kitchen before the person did. Sabrina appeared at the doorway, wrapped in a cream silk robe, hair tied loosely, holding a cup of coffee that I knew cost enough for me to buy lumber for a whole week. She wrinkled her nose the moment she stepped in. "This smell again," Sabrina said, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "Every morning I come down here and it feels like I've wandered into a nursing home." I kept stirring the eggs in the pan, though the dish on the tray was already finished, just to give my hands something to do. "Your mother-in-law likes this," I said slowly. "She can eat it and swallow it. That's what matters." Sabrina took a sip of coffee, leaned her hip against the counter, and looked at me the way people look at a machine past its expiration date. "Mr. Gideon, let me be blunt," she said, her voice drawn out, sweet but cold. "She barely eats at all. Dr. Patel already said the next step is probably placing a feeding tube. Every time you fuss around cooking, the whole house gets saturated with that hospital smell. Not to mention if anyone comes over, nobody wants to walk into a home that smells like an end-of-life care wing." I set the wooden spoon down, hearing it hit the edge of the pan dryly. The rain outside tapped against the window, pattering like someone knocking gently. "You may not like it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but this is my house, and my wife will eat what she wants as long as I can still cook it. Sabrina let out a small, flat laugh, one with no warmth. Your house, she repeated. We'll talk about that later. Mason's waiting for you in the dining room. Bring the eggs to her and then come out. Today we need to talk a little. The way she said, need to talk a little, made the back of my neck go cold. I brought the tray to Evelyn, propped her against the pillows, and watched her slowly chew the soft eggs. Outside the window, the maple tree I planted when Mason was 10 stood still in the rain. Its leaves darkened, droplets clinging on the branches like things left unsaid. Something wrong? Evelyn asked, her eyes watery as she looked at me. Even with a few words, she still read the difference in my face. I shook my head, tried to smile. It's just money stuff, I said. Mason, you know how he is. I wanted to believe what I just said was true, but my chest tightened. When I stepped out of the room, I stopped in the hallway for a few seconds, my hand on the wooden wall. Beneath these panels, I knew every brick, every old wire. I'd torn it down and rebuilt it with Harold. Patched this part, joined that part. He once told me when I was 18, a man must always have a final exit. If you don't give yourself one, someone else will decide how you end. I laughed then, thinking he was talking about carpentry. Today, that sentence came back, heavy as lead. The dining room sat at the front of the house, facing the street. The old oak table I'd polished years ago now held a vase of white tulips Sabrina had bought at the weekend farmer's market. Mason was already seated at the head of the table, the seat Harold once took, then I did. Today my son sat there as if the position had long belonged to him. He wore a dark gray suit and a perfectly knotted deep blue tie. His hands were clasped together on the table, and in front of him was a leather-bound folder. Sabrina sat beside him, her silk robe replaced by a wine-colored fitted dress, hair in a high bun, lips dark red. Her eyes shone with a strange brightness I didn't like. I pulled out a chair and sat, hearing its feet scrape the wooden floor. The room was filled with Portland's gray light, the kind that lets you see everything clearly, but warms nothing. Dad's here, Mason said, his voice sounding exactly like when I heard him order takeout over the phone. Good. Let's keep this quick. You're tired. I'm busy. I looked at the folder. What needs leather binding? Sabrina gave a small smile. Just paperwork, Mr. Gideon. A little arranging for the future. Who would have thought you'd make it to 73, huh? We should prepare now. Mason cleared his throat and opened the folder. The moment it opened, I saw the first page was a warranty gift deed, with Mason Hale listed as grantee, and below that, the printed line, Gideon Hale, grantor, and the signature block left blank, a thin line waiting for ink. I froze for a beat. This looks like it's been prepared for a while, I said, eyes fixed on the empty signature line. Mason shrugged. I had the bank pull your signature sample from the 2009 mortgage files, so we could generate the electronic draft and get it pre-approved. This paper version is the official one. It still needs your signature in front of a notary. You just have to agree. The rest is procedure. My chest went cold for a moment. No serious bank uses a client's scanned signature like that, unless someone is trying to rush the process. Dad? He began, trying to keep his tone calm, professional, as if talking to a client. This house is currently appraised at about $1.25 million. I'm working on a real estate syndication deal in the Pearl District, worth $8.4 million. If we use this place as collateral, the interest rate will be much better. The returns would be a fortune. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. This is the gift deed, Mason said. You just need to sign. Transfer the ownership to me. It's only on paper. You and Mom still live here normally. When the time comes, we won't have to deal with probate. Nobody gets the state involved. The family keeps everything. I looked down. My name was on it, then Mason's. The numbers, the legalese lines. I couldn't read as fluently as Woodgrain. There was the signature block. It was blank. I already booked the notary appointment, Sabrina cut in, her voice sweet. We can take the documents to the bank this afternoon. Everything neat, clean. That's the Hale way, isn't it? I looked up. Have you two talked about this with your mother? Silence for a beat. Sabrina glanced at Mason. He avoided my eyes. Dad, Mason said, showing impatience for the first time. Mom doesn't really understand anymore. Dr. Patel already said it. Most of the time, she's not aware of her surroundings. I know you love her, but this is about arrangements, about the future, about logic. I placed both hands on the table, feeling the wood grain I had sanded smooth years ago. Your mother understands enough to know this is her house, I said slowly. This house has my name. And your mother's? Not yours? Sabrina let out a sigh and turned to Mason. Told you, she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. He'll never get it. They cling to this house as they cling to an oxygen tank. Then she looked straight at me. Mr. Gideon, you used to run a wood shop. You understand supply and demand. Your time has passed. Now it's time for Mason to have his chance. This house is sleeping. It could be making money, or it could bury your whole family under estate taxes. A hot rush surged in my chest, like someone had poured boiling water over dry timber. No, I said without thinking. The word came out on its own, firmer than any joint I had ever built. I won't sign. This is my house, and your mother's. Not collateral for any deal of yours. The air in the room changed color. Mason's eyes darkened, his lips pressing into a thin line. Sabrina leaned back, her face blanching. Dad, Mason said quietly, dangerously, you're being selfish. I move back here. I take care of you and Mom. I pay extra for medications. I cut him off. Most of your mother's meds are covered by insurance and my savings, and you're moving back here. I looked him straight in the eye. It was because you didn't want to keep paying rent in the Pearl District. Sabrina shot up. Enough. We're not sitting here to be accused by an old man. Mason stood too, pushing his chair back. The scrape against the wood sounding like a blade dragged across timber. Fine, he said, his voice suddenly cold. If you won't understand with words, we'll have to do this another way. In the moment they were too busy standing and shoving chairs, the papers on the table shifting, I managed to slip a photocopy from the bottom of the stack, fold it into thirds, and tuck it into my flannel shirt pocket. No one noticed because all eyes were on Mason's anger. Before I could react, Mason moved behind me, grabbed the back of my chair, and turned both it and me toward the hallway. He didn't pull hard enough to knock me over, but enough that I couldn't stand with my old legs and aching hip. Mason, what are you doing? I snapped, gripping the armrest. Just giving you time to think clearly, he said, his voice so cold I barely recognized it as the boy who once ran through the backyard with sawdust on his hands. You and Mom will sit downstairs in the basement for a while, for safety. It's cool and quiet down there. No egg smell. You'll like it. Evelyn heard the noise and tried to wheel herself into the hallway. Her face panicked. Mason, she called, her voice warped. Sabrina blocked the doorway to her room, a thin smile like a blade. You should rest, Mrs. Hale. We'll handle the rest. Without time to reach for anything, I was pushed toward the small wooden door at the end of the hall, the basement door. The door I'd opened was only when checking pipes or looking for old tools. Mason opened it, and the damp cold from below rose like the breath of some long hibernating creature. Mason, stop, I said, letting fear leak into my voice for the first time. This is my house. You have no right, he roared, a sound I had never heard from my son. My house, he shouted. My entire future is in this house. If you won't sign, at least you won't ruin it. He shoved me onto the first step. I stumbled, barely catching the railing. Behind me came the sound of wheels. He was pushing Evelyn's chair, clumsy but forceful, toward me. I'll open the door when you decide to think rationally, Mason said, as if speaking to a stubborn child. For now, rest. It's quiet down there. The door slammed above us, the lock clicking shut. His and Sabrina's footsteps faded on the wooden floor, then vanished. Only the rain tapping against the house remained, echoing down like an unending whisper. I stood on the cold wooden steps, feeling the basement damp crawling up my legs. Evelyn trembled, gripping my hand so tightly her nails pressed into my skin. "Gideon," she whispered, struggling. "What is happening?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes adjusted to the dark, making out the lines of the old stone walls, the worn pipes running along the ceiling, the shadowed shapes of covered furniture, the smell of damp, of wood, of time, all blended. And in that cold, Harold's words returned, clear as the day he'd said them. A man must always have a final exit. I squeezed Evelyn's hand and guided her down a few more steps so we could sit halfway between two worlds. Above us, my son and a locked door. Below us, darkness and secrets, even time thought it had buried. "It's all right," I said softly, more to myself than to her. "They think they've trapped us, but they don't know." I looked up, following the line of the stone wall running to the left, where Harold once stood with me, pointing at a loose stone. "They don't know," I repeated, my voice lower. "What's behind that stone wall?" In the damp cold of the basement, as Portland rain fell steadily on the wooden roof above, memories began to flood back, clear enough that I could almost smell the cedar under my hand. This craftsman house wasn't just where I had lived for more than half my life. It was where Harold Hale pulled me out from under the heavy shadow of the Moretti name, a name tied to scandal and the hostility of the whole community back then, and gave me a chance to start my life again with a different name, clean and safe. Harold told me that in 1954, a young woman holding a 1-year-old child, me, stood trembling in a park in Salem, her eyes full of desperation. She was Sarah Moretti, the wife of a political aide accused of being involved in the leak of a classified memo during the Cold War. The name Moretti was treated like a stain, enough to drag a whole family off a cliff. She was nearly hopeless and told Harold through tears that if I grew up with the Moretti name, I would be treated as if I carried my father's crimes. So she begged him to take me in and give me a name I could survive with, go to school with, grow up with, without being crushed by the family's past. Harold agreed without hesitation. From that moment, I became Gideon Hale. He never hid that past from me, but he taught me something more important. Who you are isn't decided by your family name. It's decided by what you build with your own hands. The basement was cold, but when I closed my eyes, I could hear the saws of Hale Woodworks, the shop where I grew up, where I learned how to plane a piece of wood, fit a dovetail, and most importantly, live a life with honor. Harold taught me everything by making me redo it from the beginning. Flatten a warped board, resand an uneven tenon, take apart and rebuild a table, even if it was off by 1 millimeter. "Bad wood can be fixed," he said, "but a bent honor is hard to straighten." I kept those values my whole life, but sadly they didn't pass on to Mason. Mason wasn't a bad child. He used to sit on my lap and ask why pine smelled different from oak. But as he grew, he stepped into the world of finance, where money is the only morality. He wanted instant success, wanted to rise into Portland's high circles, wanted to prove he was better than me, his father, who only knew woodworking. And then he met Sabrina, beautiful, cold, sharp, but full of vanity. Her family had been wealthy once, but it went bankrupt from reckless spending. Sabrina told Mason he deserved to live on higher floors. From there, Mason began to see this house, the only legacy Harold left, as an asset to trade for his status. Mason's failed deals, Sabrina's reckless shopping, the lavish parties, the high-interest loans. All of it created a pressure I could see clearly in my son's eyes. But the way they released that pressure, by seizing the house and pushing us into the basement, was something I never thought Mason would be cold enough to do. I looked at Evelyn, trembling as she leaned against my shoulder. Her eyes still held a trace of clarity, but fear had carved its mark deep. Before the stroke, Evelyn was the light of this house, the woman who loved lavender, who held everything together, who always believed the best of our son. She was the one who sewed every curtain, baked every apple pie, and watered the porch flowers every morning. She loved Mason with a love no parent could match. And because of that, this morning's betrayal was harsher than any saw blade I had ever held. I placed my hand on the west stone wall of the basement, where Harold once paused on an afternoon in 1975. He pointed at a slightly protruding stone, one I used to think was just a flaw in the wall. Gideon, every old house has a secret, and every person does too. When you're most desperate, that's when you'll need it. I laughed back then, not understanding. Now, in this cold darkness, the words weighed like fate. I brushed my fingers against the stone. That tiny unevenness no one would notice unless they knew. It was still there, waiting for me. Just then, from above, footsteps echoed, and then Sabrina's light metallic laugh scraped down like a blade on glass. "No one's going to remember you two. Just sit still down there." Evelyn tightened her grip on my hand. I closed my eyes in the darkness. "No one's going to remember you two." She was wrong. Completely wrong. Because it's in the places where people think we've been forgotten that the kinds of endings no one can undo begin. And I knew this clearly. They had just awakened the wrong man. This place, the house, the basement, the loose stone, had never forgotten me. The basement grew darker and darker, so dark I could no longer tell where the shadows of old furniture ended and where the shadows of despair, blowing against my face, began. Portland rain fell in its own particular way, not loud, not violent, just thin, persistent layers, as if trying to seep through every grain of wood Evelyn and I were leaning against. The basement had always been damp, but now it was bone-chilling. Every time Evelyn shivered, I felt as if the entire stone wall around us trembled with her. She sat close to me, the thin blanket I found in a dark corner, not enough to warm her legs. Evelyn's fingers, once soft fingers that tended lavender flowers every morning, were now curled, trembling. I rubbed my hands together for warmth and placed them over hers, gently, trying to give her what little heat an aging man still had. "Gideon," Evelyn whispered, her breath forming a thin mist in the cold. Why would they do this?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because if I opened my mouth, I feared my voice would crack like a waterlogged wooden cabinet. In the dark, I could only hold her closer, comforting her with the same silence that had carried me through losses even heavier than this. Above us, Mason and Sabrina's footsteps had faded completely. No more laughter, no more voices, no more clinking glasses from the kitchen counter. Only the Oregon rain tapping steadily on the old boards, the drip of water through the floor cracks, and the cold sinking down like the breath of an old beast waiting in the dark. I looked up at the low, shadowy basement ceiling. The last bit of light from the door crack was gone. Mason had probably turned off the kitchen lights too. The basement sank into a thick blackness, so complete I could almost feel its weight. I held Evelyn's hand. "Wait for me a moment," I said, my voice hoarse from cold and worry. "I remember there's something Father Harold once left behind." Evelyn looked at me, her eyes weak but still trusting. I set her gently against a higher step and stood up. My knees creaked like the old pine boards I once tried to bend. Unable to take the pressure anymore, I stepped carefully across the uneven concrete floor. In the darkness, every old item became a warped silhouette. A rusted cart, wooden crates I didn't remember storing, the rocking chair Evelyn once said she'd repair when she had time. But I wasn't looking for time. I was looking for a loose stone I never believed I would need to touch. I ran my hand along the west wall. The stones were so cold they numbed my fingertips. I walked along the wall, checking each stone, every seam, every old line of mortar. The cold made my fingers ache as if pricked by needles. Then I felt it. A stone slightly protruding, its edges more worn than the others. It wasn't flush, not solid. When I pressed lightly, it shifted inward just a little, making a muted creak, something a person might mistake for wood settling if they didn't know better. Found it, I muttered to myself, my breath fogging the stone. I pressed harder. The stone gave way, revealing a hollow space behind it. I reached in with 2 fingers and pulled out something small, cold and rectangular. The metal surface was coated with dust and moisture. Under the faint scraps of remaining light from the door crack, I recognized it instantly. A player's navy-cut cigarette tin, the kind from the 1950s, the kind only men like Harold would keep as a memento. I brought it back to the steps where Evelyn was leaning. She looked at the object in my hand, her eyes widening a little. Gideon, what is that? A gift from the past, I said softly, working to pry open the old lid. Time had sealed it tight, and I had to use enough force to make my fingers throb. Finally, the lid popped open with a small snap. Inside, beneath yellowed wax paper, were 3 folded bundles of documents. I opened the first one. The words at the top hit me like a punch to the chest. Birth certificate. Caleb Moretti. I looked at the date. Correct. The place. Correct. The mother's name. Correct. But the father's name? I swallowed hard, my throat burning dry. I opened the second bundle. Adoption Decree. State of Oregon, 1954. New name, Gideon Hale. Adoptive father, Harold Hale. I remembered the story Harold told me about the park in Salem, but holding this paper now, the story felt 100 times heavier. It wasn't just a story. It was proof that my entire life had been rebuilt from one woman's desperation and one man's compassion. I opened the last set of papers. They were so old they felt like they could tear in half from a careless breath. It was a letter Harold wrote. The handwriting was straight, firm, the kind of script from a man who had drafted dozens of building plans. Gideon, if yous are reading this, it means despair has found you. You must know this truth before someone else uses it against you. Your biological father, William Moretti, was not the traitor the newspapers claimed. He was a political advisor who understood the documents involved in what later became known as the precursor to the Pentagon Papers. He was scapegoated to protect those in higher positions. He died in prison, not because of guilt, but because your family's name would have been buried completely if he had gone to trial. I took you in not only to give you a home, but to give you a name you could live in peace with. But remember, if this secret falls into the wrong hands, it can destroy everything you have built. I set the letter down, my hands trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of a truth pressing on my chest like stone. I, Gideon Hale, was actually Caleb Moretti, the son of a man falsely condemned as a traitor, saved by a man who spent his life teaching me how to live with honor. Evelyn looked at me, her eyes confused. Gideon, what does it say? I took a deep breath and placed the papers on her lap so she could see. And in that moment, the truth struck me like a hammer hitting wood. Mason built his entire career, his reputation, on the Hale name. A clean, respected name, honored in Portland. If the truth that I am a Moretti came out, Mason would lose everything. Not just his collateral deals, not just Hale and Pierce Capital, but his reputation, his clients, his place in the financial world. All of it would crumble like termite-eaten lumber. I clenched the tin box in my hand. Harold, I whispered, my voice shaking but steady underneath, you knew this day would come. I looked at the loose stone, then at Evelyn. This is the final card Harold left us. And I understood. This war had only just begun. As I was gathering the old papers back into the player's navy-cut tin, Evelyn leaned against my shoulder, her breathing growing heavier. The cold from the concrete floor had seeped into her legs, making her small shoulders shake nonstop. I held her closer, but I felt it clearly. If we stayed down here a few more hours, she would collapse, and Mason knew that. That was exactly why he locked us down here. Not just to force me to sign the papers, but to weaken me until I couldn't fight back. I was wiping Evelyn's forehead when footsteps sounded above us, followed by the metallic click of a lock turning. Cold light from the kitchen cut through the darkness, slicing it open. The door cracked open. Mason stood at the top step, his shadow stretching down the stairs like a black slash on the wall. "Dad," he said, his voice lower now, not as harsh as before. "Mom's condition sounds bad. I'm coming down to check." He stepped down a few steps slowly, eyes trying to see if Evelyn reacted. She opened her eyes faintly, and I saw it. Something in Mason flickered, small, barely there, like a thin piece of wood cracking, but real. I decided to lean into that moment of weakness. I pretended to shake hard, placing a hand on the wall as if I couldn't stand straight. "Mason, I'm not doing well," I said in a hoarse, deliberate voice. "I'm dizzy. My mind is spinning. Can you let me call Dr. Patel? Evelyn needs to see a doctor. If not..." I stopped, gasping. Sabrina shouted from upstairs, irritated and cold. "Mason, I told you. There's no need to call anyone. He's just pretending." But Mason didn't answer her. He looked at me. His face showed a rare moment of hesitation, maybe because of Evelyn's breathing, maybe because he feared being responsible if something truly happened to his mother. A crack was all I needed to slip through. I grabbed the chance. "Mason, please," I said, voice weak as though I might faint. "Just one call. If not, Evelyn, she won't make it." Mason looked down, lips pressed tightly for a long time. Finally he sighed. "Fine. But one call only." He handed me his phone but held one end firmly, reminding me he was listening to every word. "Make it quick," he said. I dialed a number as if calling Dr. Patel, but instead I called Marlon Drake, the only attorney I trusted to handle both elder abuse and property fraud. The line connected after 2 rings. "Patel speaking," I said loudly, making sure Mason heard. On the other end, Drake's voice came low and steady. "I understand. Keep speaking as if I'm your doctor." I gripped the stair railing, both for balance and to convince Mason I was on the verge of collapsing. "Dr. Patel," I said slowly. "My wife, Evelyn, she's having trouble breathing. She's shaking cold. I think she needs to see a doctor right away." Drake answered smoothly, staying in character. "What symptoms exactly? Any sign of low blood pressure? Tell me more." I glanced at Mason. He was leaning closer, listening hard. I continued. She's very weak. I need to bring her to the clinic, immediately. We're at home, but..." I paused, breathing heavily as if struggling. "But I need your help." Drake answered, calm and firm. "All right. Bring her to the Willamette Plaza building, 3rd floor. I will wait there for you in 45 minutes. Mason snatched the phone. "Doctor, is she in danger?" Drake instantly switched into his medical tone. "If she's shaking continuously and struggling to breathe, you should bring her in right away." Mason swallowed hard. He was scared now. "All right. Thank you, doctor." He hung up. Sabrina yelled from upstairs. "Mason, what is wrong with you? You keep letting him manipulate you. Your mother is fine." But Mason wasn't listening anymore. Maybe, in that thin sliver of light, some instinct, or some leftover conscience Sabrina hadn't crushed yet, woke up. "Dad, come up," he said. "I'll take you both." We were pushed up out of the basement. The warmer air upstairs helped Evelyn breathe better, though she was still weak. Mason helped me carry her to the car. Sabrina stood at the doorway, her face dark, lips pinched as if she wanted to spit something venomous, but she stayed silent because Mason was genuinely tense. At Greenway Plaza, Mason parked right at the front entrance. No one would guess this ordinary office building was where I had placed my last hope. But I knew the 3rd floor wasn't a clinic. It was the office of Drake and Associates, Elder Law and Property Defense. Mason helped Evelyn into the elevator. I followed behind. My steps were slow, but my heart pounded like the old saw at Hale Woodworks. The elevator opened. The sign on the wall read, Marlon Drake, attorney at law. Mason froze, eyes narrowing. This isn't a clinic. I pretended to breathe heavily, not answering. An assistant walked out, wearing a lab coat, but office clothes underneath. Mr. Hale, this way, Mr. Drake is waiting. Mason turned to me. What kind of doctor is this? I met his eyes, steady for the first time all morning. You'll understand soon. The assistant raised a hand to block Mason. Sorry, this is the initial evaluation room. Family members must wait outside until the doctor completes the first assessment. You'll only stress her more if you come in. Please take a seat. Mason scowled. I need to go in with my mother. The assistant stayed firm. Not at this stage. Only the patient and primary caregiver may enter the initial exam. You'll have to wait. Sabrina folded her arms and huffed. See? Rules. Just wait. The door closed, separating Mason and Sabrina from Gideon and Evelyn. Through the frosted glass, they could see only blurred shapes, hearing nothing. Drake stood up, tall, salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp as a freshly honed chisel. Mr. Gideon, he said quietly, let me see the documents. I handed him the tin. Drake opened it, and his expression changed instantly. He took out his phone and took photos of every page, every line, every old seal. Harold, if he were alive, he would have exhaled the same way I did then. Drake leaned close and whispered, just low enough for only me to hear, What you've brought me can destroy your son's entire career in 24 hours. Outside, Mason stood frozen, staring through the frosted glass at Drake bending over the tin, not knowing what was inside. Sabrina was breathing fast, her face pale like someone had struck her skull with a hammer, but she could only see blurred outlines. She had no idea what was happening. As for me, I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of fear, but because for the first time in hours, I felt hope. I sat in the small, oak-lined conference room of Marlon Drake's office, the smell of old paper and dark roast coffee blending into something hard to describe, a scent of strategy and law. Drake turned each page from the tin box, his eyes sharp as a carpenter's blade, moving over every faded ink mark, every word Harold had left for me behind that stone wall. Outside the rain-fogged glass, Portland was drowning in its signature gray. Evelyn sat beside me, her hand resting in mine, trembling slightly but holding her back straight. All her life, she had stood beside me just like this, even though her health was now only a shadow of what it once was. Drake closed the tin. We have a very strong foundation, he said, but every piece needs reinforcement, document forensics, financial evidence, and elder protection law. He pressed a call button. A young assistant entered carrying a sealed evidence bag. This is the preliminary report from the document analyst. Drake opened it and pulled out a signature comparison sheet. Mr. Gideon, he turned it toward me, this is your signature from the 2009 mortgage. Then he placed next to it the photocopied gift deed Mason had shown me this morning. And this is the signature Mason sent to the bank for pre-approval. It's a replication, not a live signature. Forensic calls this an auto-populated signature. Legally, it's a form of forgery. My chest tightened. I knew Mason was reckless, but I never imagined he'd cross that line. Drake continued, voice even and cold. Now for the notary. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. An obituary page appeared. The notary who supposedly verified the 2023 transaction, Linda Keaton, died in 2020, which means the paperwork Mason took to the bank was illegal from the start. This is extremely heavy evidence. My head swayed slightly. Drake didn't let the moment linger. He opened another file, an APS intake form. I've already contacted Adult Protective Services, he said, locking elderly people in, restricting movement, isolating them without medical supervision, That qualifies as unlawful restraint. Mason and Sabrina won't escape that. I swallowed hard at the phrase, locking elderly people. Only hours ago, I'd been sitting in that damp darkness with Evelyn, her hand gripping mine like someone slipping out to sea. Drake pulled a tablet closer. Now for the financials. He opened Mason's account dashboard. Your son is scrambling for collateral to prop up a syndication deal, but the actual numbers are negative. He needs the house to plug a financial hole. I closed my eyes for a second, so it wasn't just ambition, it was desperation. Drake placed a hand on the folder and spoke slow and precise. Here's the plan. 1. We use Harold's documents as the honor vice grip. The truth about the Hale Moretti background will collapse Mason's credibility with the people lending him money. 2. We use the forensic evidence and the notary's death record to strike legally. Mason's deed is fraud. And 3. Drake paused half a breath, looking directly at me. We need one more piece of evidence. I frowned. I didn't record anything. In the basement, I only thought about Evelyn. Drake nodded slightly, lowering his voice. I understand. But let me ask, do you have a working doorbell camera? No. Indoor cameras? Turned off since last year. Any neighbors see Mason push or argue with you? Not sure. It was raining heavily. Did you record? Call 911. Anything on your phone? I shook my head. Nothing at all. Drake exhaled. Without audio, Mason can spin this into. My elderly parents are confused, misremembering, imagining. We need one statement, one moment, anything capturing a threat or coercion. I bowed my head. Everything I had, memory, anger, pain, none of it counted as evidence. I squeezed Evelyn's hand, and then she moved, a small motion but deliberate. Evelyn slowly reached into the cloth pouch on her wheelchair. She took out her old phone, the screen cracked at the corner. She placed it on the table. Drake looked at me. I looked at her. Evelyn? She forced her mouth open, only enough to whisper 3 broken words. In the basement. I tried to delete, because still love our son, but then I couldn't. Drake opened the phone, went to voice memos. There was one file, named 10:17 a.m., the exact morning Mason locked us downstairs. He pressed play. The phone speaker filled the room with basement echoes, dripping water, wheelchair wheels, ragged breathing. Then Mason's voice. Sign or don't sign, the house is mine either way. Then Sabrina's voice. If he won't sign, put them back in the basement. Easy. A loud thud, the sound of Evelyn's wheelchair hitting the door. Then her distorted, strained voice. Mason, don't do this. And finally, Mason's scream, sharp enough to distort the microphone. This house is mine. You're old. Stop blocking my future. Drake stopped the recording, looking at Evelyn with genuine respect. Mrs. Hale, he said, softly. You just saved the entire case. I bent down and held my wife's hand, weak, trembling, but in that moment, stronger than the whole world. For the first time since morning, the darkness of that basement no longer pressed on my shoulders. They thought they had trapped us. But in that moment, Evelyn opened a door Mason never imagined. And Harold had been right. A man must always have a final way out. That afternoon, Portland's rain hung over the city like a long gray ribbon, a kind of rain that didn't clean the air but made everything heavier. Evelyn and I sat in the small oak-paneled conference room of Marlon Drake's office, listening to the printer hum behind the frosted glass. Each pull of the paper sounded like pieces of my life being stacked back into order. Drake stepped out with a thick file in hand, droplets of rain still clinging to the shoulders of his suit jacket. It's done, he said, placing the stack on the table. The notice of filing has been sent. Mason will receive it in a few hours. I nodded, but my eyes weren't fully on the documents. I knew Mason and Sabrina were standing just outside in the hallway, only a few steps from the wooden door of the office. They thought I was waiting for a doctor to check Evelyn's condition. They had no idea this door opened toward something entirely different. Drake began dividing the documents into separate bundles. "We need 12 sets," he said. "One for the court, one for APS, one for the bank, one for Mason's syndication partners, and 8 more for contingencies." He placed each document on the table, the paper hitting each other with a dry smack. 1. The birth certificate of Caleb Moretti. 2. The 1954 adoption decree. 3. Harold's letter written in blue Parker ink. 4. The forensic report proving Mason's signature was auto-populated. 5. The preliminary APS report for unlawful restraint and coercion of elderly persons. Those items fit neatly into a few dozen sheets of paper, but their weight was enough to grind Mason's entire career into dust. Drake sat down, removed his glasses, and wiped them. "Mr. Gideon," he said, steady and firm, "from the moment you step out of this room, you need to be a little weak, a little slow, a little tired." "To make Mason drop his guard?" I asked. "Exactly," Drake nodded. "Someone like him, ambitious but green, will believe you're worn down. That's when he'll slip." Evelyn squeezed my hand, her eyes still wet from the rain. Her grip was gentle but unmistakable, as if saying, "Follow the plan." Drake checked his watch, then moved to the window to look into the hallway. "They're still out there?" I nodded. I'd seen Mason's silhouette through the crack when we came in, standing against the wall, hands in his pockets, jaw tight as if calculating. Sabrina sat in the waiting chair pretending to check her phone, but her eyes kept darting toward the conference room door. They had every reason to guard it. They thought I was seeing Dr. Cross. "All right," Drake said, sealing the folders. "You walk out like a man worried about his wife. Don't look around, don't look relieved. The calmer you are, the better." I helped Evelyn stand. Her legs trembled badly, but her eyes were clearer than they had been that morning when Mason shoved us into the basement. Drake placed a steady hand on my shoulder before opening the door. "Mr. Gideon, once you step out, Mason will think he's winning. Let him believe that." The conference room door opened. The hallway went silent. Sabrina shot to her feet first. "You're done? What did the doctor say?" Mason stepped forward a beat later, his eyes scanning my face, then Evelyn's shaking hands. I remembered Drake's instructions. Let my shoulders drop, breathe heavier. "Tomorrow, more scans," I said softly. "Doctor said he needs to review older files." Sabrina narrowed her eyes, evaluating my every reaction. Mason crossed his arms, confidence returning to his posture, like he'd just heard a report favorable to his side. "Dad, you don't look well," he said. "You should rest. Tonight, I want everyone to hear you state things clearly." He didn't call it dinner, didn't call it a family meeting, but I knew exactly what he meant, and Drake had predicted it word for word. Mason was summoning a crowd, relatives, business partners, anyone involved, planning to use public pressure to force me into a corner. Mason opened the car door and helped Evelyn into the back seat. He slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and the SUV rolled out of Greenway Plaza in the rain. Portland blurred white through the windows, raindrops streaking into long lines. I could feel Mason's confidence in the way he adjusted the mirrors, set the air conditioning, and drove as if he was steering the fate of this family. A few minutes in, Mason slowed the car, eyes still on the road, but head angled toward the back seat. In the rearview mirror, his gaze locked on mine as he said, calm to the point of arrogance, 8 o'clock, everyone will be there. Be ready with your final answer. Not please, not I hope, not let's talk. Only a command, the naked declaration of a man convinced I was too weak to choose anything but surrender. I looked at Evelyn. Rain streaks on the window cast long lines across her thin cheeks, making her look even more fragile. But in her eyes, beneath the exhaustion and trembling, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, resolve. She nodded slightly, a nod without strength, but carrying more weight than any protest Mason had made in his entire life. From the moment Evelyn set that old cracked phone on Drake's table, with a recording no one expected, everything had shifted. Mason thought he was cornering us. He didn't know. That was the moment his fall was sealed. I leaned back against the seat, watching Portland blur in the rain. The 1910 Craftsman house was waiting. The cedar-ceiling living room was waiting. And the evening Mason confidently summoned, where he believed he'd deal with me in front of everyone, was waiting too. But he didn't know this. He had chosen the right place, the right hour, and the right audience for his own undoing. The car stopped in the driveway. Mason opened the back door and helped Evelyn out. I took my wife's hand and whispered, not to her, but to myself. Then, 8 o'clock. That evening, Portland looked wrapped in a thin silver rain. From the street, my Craftsman house looked different. Warm yellow light spilling through sheer white curtains, silhouettes moving slowly inside, as if this were a staged model unit in the Pearl District, rather than the old cedar home where Harold once stood on the porch, sipping coffee and talking about the wind off the Willamette River. Sabrina had done exactly what she always said she would: update the house to match Mason's status. My 1910 living room, once full of the scent of wood, old books, and Evelyn's lavender, was now decorated in the Scandinavian style she loved. Pale-toned sofa, neutral wool cushions, minimalist art framed neatly on the wall, a glossy leaf pothos plant by the window, scented candles with a smell too clean and cold, drowning out the cedar. It felt more like a stage set than a room with a soul. Evelyn sat in the wheelchair beside me, wearing the knit dress Sabrina bought her, warm-looking but strangely foreign. I pushed her into the living room at my daughter-in-law's warm invitation. Just a small family dinner to talk about your future. I knew exactly what that talk about the future meant. Drake had said, "Tonight, you let him think you're weak." I did exactly that, walking a little slower, shoulders a little sagged, breathing heavier. But my eyes weren't weak. I looked at every person in the room. Near the fireplace sat 2 relatives from Harold's side, people I only saw during holidays, the type you call when you need objective witnesses. Near the window were 2 young men in expensive suits, ties crisp, briefcases at their feet, Mason's syndication partners. Between those worlds sat Mr. Whitlock, my neighbor of over 10 years, perched on the edge of his chair, unsure why he'd been dragged into this. And near the entryway, holding a small notebook and pen, stood Mrs. Klein, the HOA president, with a polite but icy smile. "Just for transparency about the house," she'd said while shaking my hand. I understood everything. Mason wanted the room tonight full of neutral witnesses, so when he filed for conservatorship, they could all say, "We saw him being confused." Gideon and Evelyn were positioned in the middle of the room, like props placed exactly where the script required. I pushed Evelyn's wheelchair close to the sofa so she could see every face. Her eyes were far clearer than they'd been this morning, perhaps because the tension was no longer a secret, but laid bare in this room. Sabrina stepped into the center like an event host. She wore a cream satin dress, hair in a neat bun. Holding a glass of wine she hardly drank. "First," she said, her voice sweet as honey, but every word sharp, "thank you all for coming. This is not a party, just a small evening so the family and a few relevant people can discuss the future of Mr. and Mrs. Hale." She turned to me, offering a pitying smile. "Gideon has been different lately. Mason and I are very worried." The room grew quiet, waiting for the performance. Sabrina began counting on her fingers, voice steady. "In the past 3 months, Mr. Gideon left the gas on 3 times. Once I came home and found the gas stove burning with no pot on it. But Mrs. Klein bent down and wrote it into her notes. He left the front door unlocked 4 times, one of them at 2 in the morning. The neighbor emailed a warning. Luckily, nothing happened." Mr. Whitlock shifted uncomfortably, clearly recalling the day he only sent an email and didn't knock. Sabrina went on. He also misdosed Mom Evelyn's medication once. Luckily, I caught it in time. I won't mention the rest, so he won't feel embarrassed. She sighed, delivering the line she had clearly rehearsed in front of a mirror. We just want to ensure their safety. Maybe it's time to consider a conservatorship. The word conservatorship dropped into the living room like a stone, sending ripples across every face. One of Mason's partners, the one with the navy tie, nodded with practiced professional sympathy, as if this was a scenario he had seen many times among aging clients. Mason sat beside Sabrina, laptop on the coffee table, plugged into the mounted TV. He cleared his throat, trying to bring his professional voice into the living room. So no one thinks we're exaggerating. I prepared a few examples. He clicked. The TV lit up, showing slides like a pitch deck. The first slide, a photo of my front door left cracked open at night, kitchen light spilling out. A thin caption below. Front door left unlocked 3 times. The second slide, photos of the sticky notes I'd placed around the house. Reminders to take medication, turn off gas, call the doctor. The handwriting slightly shaky with age, but readable. Sabrina leaned in. You see? A normal person wouldn't need to write notes, reminding himself to lock the door, turn off gas. The third slide, a photo of me standing on a street corner 3 blocks from home, staring at the street sign as if unsure which direction to take. A hand, likely Mason's, holding the phone inside the car. Dad got lost that day, Mason said with perfectly placed fake sadness. He forgot which way our home was. No one laughed. But no one objected. The room slowly tilted toward Mason's narrative, an old man in decline needing to be managed. Mason's partners nodded at each other, murmuring, classic case for a solid conservatorship. Mrs. Klein wrote down a few more lines. The relatives stared at their hands, avoiding my eyes. Only Mr. Whitlock frowned slightly, eyes lifting toward the ceiling as if trying to recall the screams, mixed with rain the morning Mason locked us in the basement. Mason wrapped up his presentation the way he would close a meeting with an important client. I don't want to take anything from Dad. He turned to me, eyes even glistening at the right moment. I just want to protect him, and protect this house, from his own confusion. The sentence landed with calculated precision, emotional enough for his partners, procedural enough for the HOA, convenient enough for the relatives to justify standing on the side of the responsible son. One of the partners leaned over and whispered, quiet, but I heard it clearly. You should file for conservatorship. It would be in everyone's best interest. Sabrina turned and looked at me with triumph in her eyes, as if she had completed the final run-through and was simply waiting for a judge to sign off. I sat still for a long time, still enough that someone might think I hadn't heard or hadn't understood. I let the room lean entirely toward my son, let the looks of pity, logic, and civility drift onto me like judgment. Evelyn placed her hand on mine, light, like a reminder. It's time. I took a deep breath. The cedar ceiling above darkened a little, not because of the rain, but because I had seen this moment before, in Harold's workshop, right before he brought down the first hammer strike on a flawed joint. I stood up, very slowly, letting my knees tremble a little, gripping the arm of the chair like a man who needed effort just to rise. The room went silent. Every whisper, every pen scratch, every mouse click stopped. I stepped toward the coffee table in the center of the living room, the wooden table I refinished when Mason was 10, back when he ran around the house with sawdust on his hands. The table where the entire slideshow had just been used to prove I was past my time. I placed the player's navy-cut tin on the surface. The metal touching the wood made a soft but unmistakable sound, like a knock on the house's heart. The tin was old, paint peeling at the edges, one corner slightly dented. I ran my finger across the cool metal, like touching Harold's hand across the years. You're right about one thing, Mason, I said. my voice not loud but steady enough for everyone to hear. This house does need to be protected. Mason leaned forward slightly, thinking I was about to surrender and say the words, "I agree to let you manage it." I looked straight into his eyes, then swept my gaze across everyone in the room, relatives, partners, the HOA, the neighbor. "But first," I said slowly, each word placed with care, "everyone here needs to know who the man truly living in this house is." In the corner, one of Mason's partners, the navy tie one, instinctively raised his phone, out of reflex born from a generation where anything could become content. Maybe he thought he'd capture a sentimental moment of an old father thanking his son. Maybe he simply wanted a record of a strange evening, but his camera lens was trained directly on the tin and on my face as I lifted my hand toward the lid. The whole room held its breath. Portland rain tapped lightly on the window frame. The scent of candles, wine, and old wood blended together. And as the lid of the player's navy-cut tin began to open, I knew not only this room, but the entire life Mason built on the Hale name was about to hear the truth. Gideon stood in the brightly lit living room, the old cedar ceiling of the 1910 house behind him, more than 10 pairs of eyes fixed on him in front. He opened the lid of the player's navy-cut tin and took out 3 yellowed bundles of documents. A birth certificate under the name Caleb Moretti, the 1954 adoption decree, and the letter Harold had written in Parker blue ink. He looked around the glaring Scandinavian room Sabrina had staged to smother the cedar smell, and then spoke slowly, each word placed like a piece of wood set down on a workbench. "My real name is not just Gideon Hale. My birth name is Caleb Moretti." The entire room froze. The relatives glanced at each other, confused, as though they had just heard a family secret, dug up after half a century. Mason's 2 business partners snapped their heads up. Mr. Whitlock frowned. The HOA president stopped taking notes. Only Sabrina let out a scoff, looking ready to tear the story apart. Gideon didn't circle around. He told it plainly, using the language of a man who lived his whole life with his hands, needing no embellishment. His biological mother was Sarah Moretti, a woman who fled a family name smeared by scandal. His biological father was William Moretti, a political advisor framed in an early-era leak, something newspapers later called a predecessor to the Pentagon Papers. He was scapegoated to protect men ranked above him, and died in prison, leaving behind a surname hated so deeply people feared even its shadow. Gideon opened Harold's letter and read shortened passages, his voice steady, not theatrical, carrying only the weight of truth. Harold explained why he took him in, why he changed his name to Hale, why he shielded him from the Moretti name so he could grow, work, and live without the word traitor hanging above him. Gideon turned to Mason's 2 partners, looking them straight in the eye. I stayed silent about the name Moretti, not because it was shameful, but because I didn't want my son to grow up carrying a stain. Didn't cause. I lived my whole life as Gideon Hale, so Mason could start clean. Mason's face drained of color. He burst in, voice pitched high and frantic. "He doesn't know what he's saying. He's got Alzheimer's. This morning he thought today was 1994. These papers could be from anywhere." But before he could continue, Marlon Drake stepped out from the kitchen hallway, where he had been waiting for the exact moment, exactly as arranged. Gideon introduced him calmly. "This is Marlon Drake, elder law and property defense attorney, the man Dr. Patel scheduled to meet us this morning." Drake placed another file on the coffee table, his voice calm and cutting. "Every document Mr. Gideon just presented has been authenticated with the Oregon State Archives. Birth certificate, adoption decree, Harold's letter, all genuine. There is no Alzheimer's here. Only 60 years of truth he chose to keep quiet." One of Mason's partners shot to his feet, voice sharp as a blade. "So the whole story about a prestigious Hale lineage, the 1910 Hale home, the 3-generation Hale legacy you used to build the Hale and Pierce brand, Was never disclosed? And this house is still under your parents' names and in dispute? Mason stammered. Sabrina went pale under her makeup. The narrative of the rightful heir of the Hale line cracked open right in front of clients, neighbors, and the HOA. Drake continued. No need to raise his voice for everyone to hear. And that's only half the story. The rest concerns how Mason and his wife treated Mr. and Mrs. Hale this morning inside this house. Gideon looked directly at his son, his eyes no longer angry, only truthful. You thought a few lines on paper were enough for you to shove your parents into the basement of the house you're trying to claim? He placed Evelyn's phone on the table. The screen lit up. Voice memo folder. File 10:17 a.m. The whole room held its breath. Gideon spoke, his voice low but firm like a gentle knock on cedar. Harold taught me that wood can speak truth if you know how to tap it. In your time, truth sits in things even smaller than a piece of wood. Gideon pressed the button, and the living room was about to explode. Drake didn't say another word. He simply stepped to the coffee table, took Evelyn's phone and plugged it directly into the speaker and the living room TV. The screen lit up, showing the only file. 10:17 a.m. He pressed play. In the bright white Scandinavian living room, more than 10 people held their breath. At first there was only a faint, static hum, then dripping water, the soft roll of wheelchair wheels on concrete, and Evelyn's weak, ragged breathing. Then a woman's voice cut through, sharp, cold, each word dropping like breaking ice. Evelyn is just a breathing corpse. Whether he signs or not, she won't live much longer anyway. Sabrina. The whole room whipped toward her. She shrank into the sofa, face drained to ash. Next came Mason's voice, so raw, no microphone distortion could hide its cruelty. Lock them. This house is mine. Whether Dad signs or not, it's the same. A loud thud, Evelyn trying to move her wheelchair, then her choked plea. Mason, don't do this. And finally, the sound that tore the room open, the sentence the basement heard that morning. This house is mine. You're old. Stop blocking my future. When the files stopped, the living room didn't explode with shouting. It exploded with a silence so thick it felt like wet concrete poured over everyone. Mrs. Klein, the HOA president, was the first to break it. Her voice was sharp as a blade sliding across glass. Mr. Hale, you locked your elderly parents in a basement, barred the door, left them begging like that, in a property under my HOA's jurisdiction? She pulled out her phone and dialed fast. I'll be reporting this entire incident to the HOA board, and if necessary, to the police. Mr. Whitlock, the quietest man on the block, took one step forward, eyes red with anger. That rainy morning, I heard yelling. I thought it was just another father-son fight, but it wasn't. I was wrong. I'll testify I heard pleas for help from your basement. Mason's two partners stood like statues. One lifted his phone slowly, recording the frozen waveform on the TV screen. He sent it straight into the Hale and Pierce internal chat with the message, Elder abuse, immediate freeze. Less than a minute later, his phone buzzed nonstop, news spreading like wildfire. Sabrina collapsed onto the chair, clutching Mason's sleeve, voice cracking. I only wanted to help you. I didn't know. I only did what you told me. She began dumping every ounce of blame onto Mason in frantic desperation. Mason sank into his seat, face ghost pale, ash-colored. Every gaze, relatives, clients, neighbors, the HOA, fell on him like he was a creature whose skin had just been peeled off. Only then did Drake pull a thick yellow envelope from his suit pocket and place it gently on the table in front of Mason, but the sound landed like a verdict hitting stone. This is the notice of filing submitted this morning. Drake's voice was low, steady, each word like a charge being read. A petition to void all transactions involving the property due to fraud and undue influence. A formal report opened with Adult Protective Services for unlawful restraint and coercion of Mr. and Mrs. Hale, and the transfer of all documents, including the recording just played, to the police department and the State Securities Commission. One of Mason's partners shot to his feet, leaving his wine glass where it was. Effective immediately, all syndication transactions with Mason Hale are suspended indefinitely. I can't put client money in the hands of someone who imprisoned his own parents to use their house as collateral. He turned to Gideon, bowing his head slightly. I apologize for ever believing the devoted son story. Mason reached toward the envelope, but his hand couldn't touch it. His fingers shook like a dull, unstable saw blade. Gideon looked at his son for a long time. His eyes held no anger, only the bare, unvarnished truth of a father. Then he said slowly, like tapping truth into cedar for everyone to hear, "You said I was destroying your future. No, Mason, tonight, in front of every person here, you destroyed it yourself." Mason broke into tears, but no one in the room saw him as a victim anymore. Rumors didn't spread. They seeped through Portland like autumn drizzle, soaking into every alley, every coffee shop, every group chat I never imagined my family's name would land in. And it all began in less than 2 days, after the night Mason turned himself into a subject for the entire community. The next morning at 6:30, Marlon Drake called me. "It's begun." I didn't know what it meant until he sent me the first screenshot. The internal Hale and Pierce Capital group chat, where Mason's partner had live-streamed the audio file from the night before, was leaking outward. One caption alone was enough to chill my spine. If this is true, Hale and Pierce better prepare for press fallout. By noon, a relative from Harold's side, Evelyn's cousin, posted a vague line on Facebook. "Can you believe someone locked their elderly parents in a basement for a house? Portland is shaking." No names, no direct accusation, but everyone knew who she meant. By afternoon, a local finance blog published Hale and Pierce Elder Abuse Scandal, with the opening line, "An incident is rattling the upscale neighborhoods of Portland." I'd never seen my name in Evelyn's next to the word scandal, but Mason had. One day later, 3 of Mason's largest clients emailed to withdraw their entire portfolios. The firm's compliance department sent an internal notice immediately. Mason Hale is suspended from all advisory activity pending investigation. They didn't need a court ruling. They only needed to protect client money. Within 48 hours, Mason's career, built on ambition and on the Hale name he tried to seize, collapsed like a wooden cabinet with rotted legs. On the 3rd day, APS arrived at our home. A caseworker named Michelle stepped into my cedar-scented living room, small frame but sharp eyes. She interviewed Evelyn gently, asking each question slowly to be sure she understood. Evelyn, though weak, answered clearly. The caseworker wrote notes, then said, "We are officially opening a case. You are not alone anymore." She invited Mr. Whitlock and Mrs. Klein from the HOA to give statements. Both came that same afternoon. Mr. Whitlock confirmed he had heard screaming from the basement. Mrs. Klein presented the HOA bylaw prohibiting any form of unlawful restraint in properties under the association. That evening, county police arrived. They copied the audio file from Evelyn's phone, reviewed the neighbor's doorbell camera, and recorded the incident as unlawful restraint, elder abuse, pending DA review. They said the district attorney's office would decide whether the case went criminal or civil. No one promised anything, but no one was ignoring it. A little over a month later, the hearing at the Multnomah County Courthouse took place. I sat on the cold wooden bench, Evelyn beside me, Drake walking ahead like a man clearing the path for a verdict already written. Mason and Sabrina sat on the opposite side. Mason looked noticeably thinner. Sabrina had heavy makeup on, but her eyes were swollen from sleeplessness. When the judge entered, every sound seemed swallowed. Drake presented first. The forensic report proving Mason's signature sent to the bank was auto-populated. not a live signature. The obituary confirming that notary Linda Keaton had died in 2020. The basement audio file, Mason's scream of, "This house is mine," slicing through the courtroom like a blade through his own reputation. The APS preliminary report citing coercion and unlawful restraint. The judge asked Mason, "Do you contest any of this?" Mason stared at the table. Not a single word. By the end, the judge ruled. 1. The gift deed is void due to fraud and undue influence. 2. Mason is prohibited from using the house as collateral. 3. A protective order is issued. Mason and Sabrina may not contact us without written consent. In addition, a representative from the State Securities Commission issued notice. Mason's financial advisor license was suspended pending full investigation. No one declared Mason guilty, but no one was willing to let a man who locked his own parents in a basement handle other people's money. When the hearing ended, Mason walked into the hallway with empty hands. No house, no $8.4 million syndication deal, no license, no clients, and no clean hail name to wrap around himself like a prestigious cloak ever again. That night, I stood by the cedar-framed window, looking down at the front porch. Sabrina was quietly dragging a suitcase, throwing bags into her car trunk. She didn't look back at the house once. Mason stood in the rain, calling her name in desperation. But when the car door shut and the red taillights washed over his face, all I saw was a man staring at the future he had shattered with his own hands. The Portland rain fell, cold and relentless. But this time, it didn't wash anything clean. 3 months passed since the night Mason stood in the rain, screaming Sabrina's name, as if trying to claw back the last scrap of his dignity. Portland slipped into its rare, sunny season, thin paper-like rays sliding through the old window frames of the 1910 craftsman home, casting light onto the cedar grain Harold once traced with his fingers when he first brought me here. In that gentle light, Evelyn recovered faster than any doctor predicted. Once she no longer lived in an atmosphere of control, no longer heard keys turning in the basement lock, no longer endured Sabrina's watching eyes. She seemed to return to herself, eating more, sleeping deeper, her anxiety medication cut to half dose, even letting out a soft laugh sometimes when she remembered the maple tree by the porch, or the times Harold would lose track of dinner while planing wood in the shop. As for me, I knew I had something to do. I went back down to the basement. It had once been the darkest heart of the house, the place where we shivered, freezing, listening to dripping water, and the sound of Mason's footsteps leaving like a sentence passed. I turned on every light, removed the sooty old bulbs, installed a strip of warm LEDs along the ceiling. I treated each damp line along the stone walls, sealed every crack Mason never even knew existed. Then I placed a new workbench, hung tool racks, and on the west wall, where Harold had tapped his knuckles and said, "This stone isn't like the others," I hung a small wooden frame containing a copy of the adoption decree and Harold's letter. Looking at it, the basement was no longer a cell. It became my studio, a place where I created new things from wood, from light, from a life someone once tried to break but never succeeded in breaking. When I made the first cuts into a block of cedar, Mr. Whitlock passed by the basement window and tapped on the frame. Leaning on his old cane, he smiled like someone who understood far too much. From that day on, he became a true friend. On weekends, he helped me replace the old pipe under the sink, the one Mason said, "Dad can handle that." He helped me tend Evelyn's lavender beds, which she once loved, and Sabrina nearly abandoned. In the afternoons, we sat on the front steps, drinking black coffee, listening to me talk about Harold, about Hale Woodworks, about the scent of fresh-cut wood Harold used to call the smell of hope. Mrs. Klein, the HOA president, also stopped by once. When I opened the door, she stood still for a long moment, then said softly, "We used to think you were just an old man guarding his house too tightly, Now I understand. You weren't protecting Wood. You were protecting a lifetime. I didn't answer, but for the first time in months, I felt something warm in my chest. One August morning, in the wooden mailbox out front, I found an envelope sitting at an angle. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Mason. I opened it right there on the porch. The first line alone felt heavier than lifting a full cedar slab. I didn't think things would go this far. I was just trying to save a deal. The pressure was too much. Half apology, half excuse, not denying the audio, but not accepting responsibility either. Not one sentence about Evelyn, not one line that showed he truly understood. I folded the letter, took it down to the basement, opened the player's navy cut tin, the box that held the papers of me, of Harold, of the past Mason once sneered at, and placed the letter inside. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to cut him off, but because I knew any words now would only give him something to use to forgive himself too soon. That afternoon, while I was planing a cedar plank, Evelyn looked up and asked, "Are you sad?" I didn't know how to answer, so I spoke quietly, just enough for her, or maybe only for myself to hear. Someday, if life opens another door, I'll tell him the rest of the Moretti story. Not so he can justify himself, but so he understands. Who you choose to become matters more than the name you're born with. When the late afternoon light hit the rafters, I carved a small line of words into the inside face of the new beam, where not everyone would see it. This house is kept by honor, not paperwork. And as the cedar warmed the newly reborn room with its scent, I felt it clearly. We had taken the house back, not by winning or losing, but by truth, and by something Mason never understood. Wood has memory, and it only opens itself to those who know how to keep it. On one of Portland's rare sunny mornings, sunlight thin as a scarf someone had let slip across the sky, Evelyn and I sat in Drake's car, rolling slowly through streets still damp with mist. She sat beside me, her hand resting on mine. She didn't speak, just tightened her grip. The Multnomah County Courthouse rose ahead with its ash-colored stone walls, familiar like a place I had walked into too many times during Harold's life, but this time was different. This time I came not to defend myself, not to hide the name I once treated like a death sentence, but to face it outright. In the quiet administrative office, the young clerk handed me the legal name change packet. I read each line slowly. Gideon Hale, Gideon Caleb Hale. Harold once said, "A name is something you answer to for the rest of your life." Today I answered to both, the one I was born with and the one another father placed on me so I could keep living. I signed. The signature didn't tremble. Drake stood beside me, nodding once. "You're certain, Gideon?" I looked at him, then at Evelyn's eyes, eyes that had endured the basement's darkness, Sabrina's cruelty, Mason's betrayal, and said, "I don't have to hide from the name Moretti anymore, but I'm not abandoning the name Harold Hale put on my shoulders." When I held the new ID card, Evelyn touched the line where Gideon Caleb Hale was printed clearly. She smiled, the first full, bright, complete smile in months. It wasn't big, not loud, but it was like a beam of sunlight cutting straight through the old wooden roof, warming the whole room. We returned to the 1910 Craftsman as afternoon dropped. Portland light streamed through the newly replaced window glass, sliding across Harold's cedar beams. The smell of wood, the smell of coffee, the distant streetcar. Everything reminded me of the first time Harold brought me here. But now, everything felt lighter. Lighter because there were no more secrets. Lighter because there was no longer fear of being found out. Lighter because for the first time after 73 years of living under two names, I was finally one person. I sat at the table, pulled out a sheet of writing paper. The blue ink flowed. I wrote for life, not for anyone in particular. Mason might read it. He might not. Maybe someday a kid who buys this house decades from now will open it and and wonder who an old man named Gideon used to be. My handwriting grew bolder as I reached the last line. Family is not blood. It's the people who still stand with you when the room goes dark. I placed the letter into the player's navy-cut tin, the box that had become a kind of black box of my life. Birth certificate, adoption decree, Harold's letter, notice of filing, and Mason's letter from the day he admitted he'd lost everything. I closed the lid, didn't lock it. Truth doesn't need a lock. The basement, now the studio, smelled of cedar and linseed oil. A few neighborhood kids dropped by every weekend. I showed them how to plane a board smooth, how to mount a bookshelf without it tilting, how to hear the breath of wood when you strike it at the right point. I told them about Harold, the old man who saw the Moretti child in me and still opened the workshop door. I told them what Harold once said. Bad wood can be fixed, but bent honor is hard to straighten. They nodded, not fully understanding yet, but their eyes lit up like little beams of sunlight slipping between floorboards. One evening I locked the front door. Portland winds brushed the maple tree I planted when Mason had just turned 10. The leaves rustled. I stood there for a long time. I no longer felt trapped in this house, no longer felt pushed into the basement, literally or otherwise. Today I chose to stay, not out of duty, but out of freedom. Real freedom. The kind it took 73 years and a confrontation with my own son for me to reach. I stepped inside, looked up at the old cedar ceiling, saw the last light of day slanting across it, specks of sawdust floating like pieces of memory held in the air instead of falling away. Harold's voice echoed in my mind. A man must always have one final way out. I smiled, shook my head gently, and added a line of my own. The ending I knew would someday be used for my story. Sometimes that way out isn't leaving the house, but standing tall in the very place someone once tried to bury you. My story ends here. But if you've made it to this line, maybe somewhere in your life you've had a dark room, a slammed door, or someone you trusted who gave you a reason to rise again. And if even a moment in Gideon's journey made you pause, made you remember yourself or someone you love, leave a comment to let me know you're still here, walking with me to the last page. If you believe a person's dignity isn't in the bloodline they were born into, but in how they stand up after being pushed into the basement, hit follow and turn on notifications. I don't tell these stories to be pitied. I tell them to remind you. No house is too old to rebuild. No life is too late to stand upright again. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if you're still here in the videos to come, I promise I'll keep telling the journeys where the light always finds a place to slip through.